Hello, we're going to briefly go over Chapter 11, Interest Groups for AP Government. If you have your PowerPoint, you can go ahead and get that out. A highlighter and or a pen to make any notes as we go through this. We talked about in class the other day going through interest groups. Remember, can you define an interest group? How are they linking people to government? Can you define and identify interest groups and how they function? And can you describe how interest groups impact the political process? The last one is more of a critical thinking question, defending or refuting why interest groups are necessary in society. And James Madison discussed that in Federalist number 10. The first point that I would like to go through is simply the definition of an interest group. If you remember, an interest group is also called a special interest, and it's just a group of people with similar policy goals, and they try to influence government action in an area of policy. Specifically, it can be an environmental interest group that they want to influence clean air, clean water. It can be a small business group that is trying to influence the government in healthcare. The bottom line is interest groups try to influence every branch and every level of government. A large part of this PowerPoint goes over really how interest groups even began. And remember in Federalist number 10, James Madison said, factions will always exist, and it's up to us to start a government that can allow for diverse interests without allowing one to dominate. If we look at this portion, this says interest groups have been part of the American political landscape since the country's founding. Our very first two interest groups formed really around our political parties, those who wanted a strong national government and those who wanted a strong state government, Federalists versus Anti-Federalists. We also had many religious associations and anti-slavery movements in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s. Madison in Federalist 10 argued for a proliferation of groups. He said, we will never be able to prevent everybody from thinking ideas, so we need to come up with a government that can check and balance so no one group would dominate. The open nature of the American government invites organized political participation. I will say on many different levels that allows for a decentralization. You can impact your federal government, you can impact your state government, and you can also impact your local government when we talk about these ideas. Man, I'm having technical difficulties, sorry. The next ideas talk about different types of groups that can form in a democracy. Just to review, a pluralist theory or pluralism argues that interest group activity brings representation to all, that it's okay to have many different ideas. Interest groups compete and counterbalance one another. This is probably one of the healthier views of pluralism. Critics of pluralism often give short notice to those who are not organized. They say having many people with different views fails to deal with the fact that some interest groups have more power than others. And it also seems to leave no room for consideration of transcendent national interests. Do we have ideas that are prevalent for the national government versus state and local? Hyperpluralist is the theory that when you have so many groups becoming powerful that they dominate the political decision making and they render really anything impossible to carry out for the greater public good. So when you have a hyper-pluralist system, there are so many, it produces gridlock or instability in government. This next section simply goes through types of interest groups, and it's important that you understand that because we're so varied in the United States, there are tons of subjects that exist, many times because of things that happen in our economy or things that happen with foreign policy or in our personal lives, say social or religious beliefs. Groups form that try to influence laws. So here, the 70s pro-independence groups emerged. If you think of Sam Adams' original group, he was one who rallied people for the cause of independence. You have national groups emerge, religious and anti-slavery groups. During the progressive era, look at all these organized labor groups because we had people going to work and they were fighting for better working conditions. The AFL-CIO, this first portion was formed in the 1800s and is really one of our largest unions that advocate for laborers' rights. We have a business and trade association, such as the National Association of Manufacturers or the National Association of Realtors present day, and those tend to focus around business goals. We really went through a huge rise of interest groups when we went through the civil rights movement in the 1960s. A varied form of religious and ideological groups. Remember, this means a group of like-minded people who carry similar ideas, conservative versus liberal or libertarian, etc. We had more business groups, trade and professional associations, and we also had more organized labor and environmental and consumer labor. So that went through a huge period of growth. Why do we have such a huge rise in interest groups in the last 40 years or so? Well, first of all, when we have a broad economic development, when the government or our industry grows, it creates different groups that have different needs. So when we get into farming, we now have commercial farming. When you have unions such as the Teamsters Union, they might want a specific goal, or teachers for that matter. Each trade area has their own focus. We have more interest groups when government policy is created. Anytime the government intervenes in the economy or the government intervenes in our personal lives, it creates sides and people band together. For example, when we have foreign wars, we have veterans, we have more soldier or military needs. So you might have interest groups that spring up to help them. During the New Deal, all of the New Deal programs that took place, we had a growth of interest groups. When you have professional associations, all of a sudden we are having medical associations, realtor associations, the Chamber of Commerce. Different industries create their own lobbying. The tobacco lobby is one of the most powerful ones as well. If you have an emergence of strong leaders, for example, the civil rights movement, the NAACP, the National Advancement for Colored Persons, is one of our strongest and most organized unions that we have fighting for rights. We also have AARP, which is fighting for the rights of elderly. Emily's List is a women's advocacy. You can look up Emily's List and see different things for women's rights. And we also have anti-war movements, and those are self-explanatory as well. The bottom line really is active government leads to active interest groups. And interest groups want to protect their area, whether it's civil rights, consumer rights, or the environment. I want to give you just a couple historical examples of interest groups. And this is how you can look at how they're categorized. Institutional, right here, is where the institution itself has an interest group. So this says individuals or organizations that represent other organizations, such as the Chamber of Commerce. They represent many businesses within a community. So you join the Chamber of Commerce, then the Chamber of Commerce lobbies for St. Joseph businesses as a whole, rather than McDonald's lobbying for that, and etc. So sometimes your cities will band together and do businesses within a community. General Motors advocating for car safety and things like that. Those are institutional. You also, though, have interest groups that are membership-based. You join an interest group, and this is something that is voluntary through contributions or activities. So say, for example, I want to join the League of Women Voters. I want to help civic education, and one of the ways I can do that is through working in or volunteering really in a league that supports voting. The NAACP on civil rights issues, a Rotary Club. You might see those all around town. Rotary Club, Lions Club, those are all membership groups where you give back by volunteering, but in exchange you might get some material benefits or discounts as well. The American Legion for veterans, the AARP, is a very strong interest group that educates on the issues of the elderly. They might send out a flyer that is giving background on some healthcare issue. But really, AARP can do many, many things. It can tell you elderly issues that are facing us today. It can educate us, but it also can provide discounts. So those are the two big different types. Why would anyone join an interest group? Well, this is where you decide that you want to make a difference. And so some people join just to get incentives. An incentive is something of value you can't get without joining. So say, for example, your grandma or grandpa wants a discount at a restaurant or a discount at the movie theater or a discount at a hotel. When you join these groups, you might get 10 to 15% off at different restaurants around the country just for doing that. Just for joining. So different types of incentives. A solitary incentive means you just enjoy, you get pleasure out of joining the interest group. You like meeting people who have the same ideas as you. Some people join and they don't want anything to do with anybody else, but they want the material incentives. They like maybe there is a bank that goes along with joining it, or they get different financial discounts or services that I mentioned earlier. And purposive incentives at the end is you want to join the group because you want to see a goal. You want to see clean air in St. Joseph, so you join an interest group that bans smoking. Social causes demand change. So you can look at any interest group sites and I think you'll see that trend. All right, when you work for an interest group, you are called a lobbyist. And many interest groups take the membership fees and they hire somebody to lobby professionally on their behalf. So the most common and effective interest group technique where interest groups get their message out is through lobbying or seeking to influence and persuade others to support your group's position. Lobbyists are hired by businesses, foreign countries, and I'm saying a foreign country as in the pro-Israeli. You can't have a head of state come in and be an official lobbyist. What you have to do is register with the House and Senate in order to be an official lobbyist on Capitol Hill. But you can argue on behalf of a foreign country. Different trade associations and anyone else really who wants their voice heard can hire a lobbyist. Jack Abramoff in the case study that we watched was a lobbyist who was hired by many different companies to represent them on Capitol Hill. So a lobbyist is someone whose task is to influence legislation, which is laws and policy making. One of the main goals for lobbyists is to gain access to lawmakers. If you are a good lobbyist, you are able to get into the congressman's office for meetings. You will provide information. And if you really have a great reputation about being honest and giving good information, you will be very valuable to congressmen. If you have a reputation of being untruthful and disingenuous, legislators aren't going to open their doors. So lobbyists really have to pull their weight about being honest and credible in the information that they give to congressmen. The last thing I want to do here, and then I'll stop before I talk about iron triangles. There are many types of interest groups, and you will see that groups tend to share common bonds. So take a look at some of these key ones. One of the stronger religious groups is called the Christian Coalition. We talked about this when we talked about voting and the Christian right. Catholics also have a large lobbying area as well. The pro-Israeli lobby is a Jewish lobby, which is pretty powerful in Washington, D.C. For issues of civil rights and equality, the NAACP, again, that association for the advancement of colored persons, that is one of really the most effective lobbies that I have seen recently. They help pass legislation. They take cases to court, which is called litigation. If they can't get past something in the Congress, they take it through the court system. So the NAACP has many tactics that they use to persuade. Different professional ones I've already talked about. A very powerful environmental one you can look up is Sierra Club. For political reform, Common Cause, Ralph Nader, who has run for president several times, formed Common Cause. And really what that does is it's an awareness group to look at different effects that we can have on political change. The ACLU, another big one, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, one of the most effective in defending First Amendment rights of different groups. So NAACP and ACLU are wonderful examples. We'll talk more about those in the civil rights. They all have a common goal of trying to influence the outcome of elections and laws. But remember, unlike political parties, they do not nominate candidates. That's one of the main differences. Political parties want to win the election. Interest groups just want to influence decisions that are made. Here are the last things. Normally, they're grouped into different categories. Remember, you have economic interest groups that are formed to protect members' economic interests, and I mentioned that earlier, and there's a great list of business examples. Public interest are nonprofit organizations that focus on public policy. I'm sorry, I need to correct something I said earlier. I said Common Cause was that one by Ralph Nader, and it's Public Citizen. That was my fault. And he really advocates for safer consumer products. You also have the Sierra Club. I talked about that as environmental. And then single issue groups that focus on just one issue, like the NRA, the National Rifle Association on Gun Rights, the National Right to Life Committee, the National Abortion Rights Activist Committee. Those are all single issue. So I'm going to stop here just for a moment, and I'm going to come back with part 2. I hope that was a little bit of a review on interest groups, what type of interest groups exist, why you would have interest groups, and different groups that are in the United States today.